Ronald Reagan, sort of a famous movie actor, though not in any great movies. Was well known, became governor of California, popular with both Democrats and Republicans in California. Became president, beat Jimmy Carter. He was going to change the economy. He had something called supply side economics. That meant cutting taxes, especially for the rich, would leave more money for businesses and investors to put into business, and that would put more money into people's pockets further down the chain, like the middle class and the poor. Businesses would be hiring more people, the economy would grow faster, and a rising tide would raise all ships. It didn't exactly work out that way during his administration, but that was the theory he was working under. He thought high taxes would discourage people from investing in businesses. He thought that it drained money away from the economy, so he was going to lower taxes, especially for businesses and the wealthy. So he did 3 big tax cuts, and he reformed the way taxes were distributed and collected. He also did tax hikes on different things. He was going to change the government. This is a big thinker. The government had expanded over the century with the New Deal, with the expansion of power during Vietnam, with the New Frontier of John F. Kennedy, and the Great Society of Lyndon Johnson. These were all government programs, so each government program gives more power to the government. So he shrank the government by deregulation, continuing Jimmy Carter's policy of deregulation, shrinking the size of government agencies and the amount of people working in those agencies and the responsibilities of those agencies, shifting a lot of responsibilities to the things the government used to, the federal government, the national government did, shifting those responsibilities to states and local governments like cities and counties. The problem was that it was not during a time of economic soundness. The economy was not going strong. So this recession that we were in left many local governments near bankrupt because all of a sudden things they didn't pay for before they had to pay for. He was hard line against unions. When the Air Traffic Controllers Union went on strike, this is Air Traffic Controllers Union is a just a regular union, but all the air traffic controllers are employed by the federal government, and he fired them all. They ended up having to hire, until they could find more air traffic controllers, they ended up having to hire air traffic controllers from the Army and the Navy and the Air Force. Tried to reform welfare. He believed that you had to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, that government handouts were not good. So he eliminated jobs programs. He eliminated employment training. And he lowered the welfare benefits and spending, and he cut the spending on food stamps. And he raised the amount of money that was owed for Medicare fees. So he reformed welfare. In foreign policy, he took a real hardline approach to the Soviet Union. He grew up during the Cold Wars and during, he was alive during Korea and Vietnam, and he was alive at the end of World War II. So he spent enormous amounts of energy and money on new technology and new weapons to combat the Soviets. He had something called Star Wars. It was the Strategic Defense Initiative. This was a massive satellite system that would be up in space, and it would destroy incoming Soviet missiles. They worked on it for 6 years. They worked on it throughout two different administrations, but it never came to fruition. That technology still does not exist. We had terrorist attacks during the Reagan administration. In Beirut, Lebanon, a truck bomb hit a compound which was holding U.S. Marines and killed 241 Americans. Libya was a big sponsor of terrorism back in that era, and so he bombed the crap out of Libya, missing the leader of that country, Muammar Gaddafi. U.S. at that time was helping a lot of Western Hemisphere countries fight against communism. Western Germany, Czechoslovakia, Turkey were all countries that we were heavily throwing lots of weapons and manpower in to stop the growth of the Soviet Union. There's a tiny island near the Caribbean called Grenada. He invaded that in 1983 to protect Americans who were at a medical college there. There are those Americans at the medical college, but we stayed there, and we owed it through the government, and we gave them new elections, and nobody really remembers that. We were coming out of a recession at this time. Slowly but surely, the country was sliding up out of the recession. Unemployment was going down. Reagan had promised to balance the budget, but he had to spend money to get us out of the recession. So the budget deficit went from $80 billion at the beginning of the Reagan administration to $221 billion at the end. And the national debt grew to $90 billion. Let me rephrase that. Reagan had promised to balance the budget. The entire budget of the government was $80 billion and went up to 221 by the time he left office. The debt went from 90 billion to 3.2 trillion. That is a debt that Clinton, who we'll talk about next, after Herbert Walker Bush, but Clinton inherited a huge deficit and actually balanced the budget. And we'll close with his civil rights record. President Reagan, during the 1980s, African Americans were being elected to offices all over the country. The first black African American since Reconstruction was elected the governor of Virginia, and then the first African American president or mayor of New York was elected during the 1980s, David Dinkins. So these were big, huge victories for African Americans, but Reagan was not popular with African Americans. One of the problems is he refused to sign the Martin Luther King Day and make it a national holiday, even though it was written by Congress. And he reacted very slow, very slow. In fact, some people say he didn't react at all to the AIDS crisis that blew up during the 1980s. There was a campaign for more research into AIDS and for safe sex education in those communities. It was mostly growing when it first blew up, it mostly grew in the homosexual community and spread quickly into the heterosexual community. And Reagan's reaction to that was often criticized. And that's where we're going to end the lecture for today. We'll finish the Reagan lecture